Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the show that goes beyond the headlines, really digging into the facts, the context, everything you need to feel truly informed. Today, we're getting into a story that is still incredibly raw for many people. It's from September 2020, the Hathras case. Just try to picture this. A family already coping with just unthinkable violence against their daughter is then denied the most fundamental right, the right to grieve, to perform her last rites with dignity. Instead, the authorities, the very people meant to protect, conducted this rushed, secretive cremation in the middle of the night, against the family's explicit wishes, just shrouded in darkness. And that image, that really jarring violation of basic dignity, that's where our deep dive starts today. Because this isn't just about a horrific crime against a young Dalit woman in North India. It's also a really stark look at institutional failure, isn't it?
Absolutely. And the role of caste, power dynamics, and the silence that can often follow these events.
Exactly. So our mission today is to move past that initial shock, to really peel back the layers. We're going to meticulously look at the granular details, the facts, the critical timelines, the official responses, which were often quite labyrinthine, and the really deep structural problems this case just threw into sharp relief. We'll explore how every single detail, every decision made, escalated this from a local tragedy into a national flashpoint. It forced some very uncomfortable questions.
Uncomfortable is putting it mildly. Questions about justice, dignity, how democracy functions or sometimes fails to function.
Precisely. We want to give you, our listeners, a really comprehensive understanding of what actually happened and, importantly, why it still matters so much.
Right. And what's so illuminating, or perhaps disturbing about Hathras, is how it started. It began on September 14th, 2020. A seemingly ordinary day in a rural village. The young woman, the victim, had just gone out to collect fodder, something probably done countless times before, in a field near her home. But in that field, her life changed irrevocably. She was attacked, allegedly by a group of men from the same area, and the immediate aftermath, the reports from her family first and then later confirmed by medical sources, they detailed horrific injuries. This wasn't minor by any stretch.
No, the details that emerged were brutal.
Exactly. Clinicians later documented severe blunt force trauma, especially to her neck and spine. It was so bad it led to paralysis. She couldn't move, couldn't speak for a time, and there were other injuries too, consistent with a violent sexual assault.
And her medical journey afterwards. That also tells a story, doesn't it? The severity of it all.
It really does. She was first taken to a local hospital, but her injuries were clearly too severe, so she was referred to a bigger facility in the state capital. Even there, her condition worsened. The decision was made to airlift her to a top-tier tertiary hospital in Delhi, the national capital, for specialized care.
And it's crucial to note she was alive when she arrived in Delhi.
Yes, absolutely critical. Medical records confirm this. The clinicians in Delhi documented extensive injuries, multiple fractures, signs of severe trauma. She needed urgent critical care. The whole sequence, the escalating transfers, the nature of the injuries, it just underscores the sheer brutality of what she endured in that field.
And then amidst all this, fighting for her life, comes this incredibly critical moment on September 22nd, 2020, the dying declaration. Can you explain for our listeners why this is so significant legally?
Of course. A dying declaration under Indian law holds immense weight. It's a statement made by someone who genuinely believes they're about to die. The idea is that someone in that position has no reason to lie. So it's considered very powerful evidence, admissible in court. It's taken under solemn circumstances, often by a magistrate, as was the case here.
And what did she say in this declaration?
She was lucid,
Yeah.
clear. She named 4 specific men as her attackers, and she stated unequivocally that she had been gang raped and brutally assaulted.
So that statement completely changed the legal landscape of the case.
Absolutely. It elevated it immediately. From a horrific assault to a case involving gang rape and potentially murder charges later on, it had profound implications.
And then the tragic turning point. Her death just days later on September 20th.
Yes. And her death, as heartbreaking as it was, didn't just end her fight. It fundamentally shifted the public focus.
How so?
The conversation, the outrage, it moved almost instantly from the violence she suffered to the violations that happened after her death. Specifically, how her body was handled, the cremation.
That's when the story took another deeply disturbing turn.
Precisely. It transitioned from a story about a crime of violence to one about a crime against dignity. And that became the defining narrative.
So, after her death in Delhi, what did the family want? What was their immediate wish?
Their wish was simple, natural, and deeply rooted in their customs. They wanted to take her body back to their village. They wanted to perform her last rites themselves, according to their traditions.
Which is a fundamental part of grieving, of closure.
Exactly. It's not just ceremony, it's a sacred act, essential for their peace, their sense of closure. But what happened next? Well, that's what became the absolute flashpoint. It turned an already awful situation into a national scandal.
So the police brought her body back.
Yes, the local police transported her body back from Delhi. But instead of facilitating the family's wish for a traditional daytime ceremony, they arrived late at night, very late, early hours of September 30th. And rather than allowing the family to prepare, the officials conducted the cremation themselves, hastily, between 2:30 a.m. and 3:30 a.m., still dark, well before sunrise.
In the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Without the family's consent.
Without their consent, and according to numerous reports and family statements, actively preventing their participation. The details are chilling. Reports described police vehicles forming a tight cordon, physically blocking family members, even media, from getting near the pyre.
So a family couldn't even get close.
Eyewitnesses said distraught relatives were physically pushed back. Some were reportedly confined to their homes while the pyre burned just yards away.
That's unimaginable.
And to compound the humiliation, a distant relative, someone not chosen by the immediate family, reportedly pressured by authorities, was made to perform the rites.
Which the family rejected.
Vehemently. They said it wasn't their custom, that they were robbed of their right. Images and videos later surfaced showing the pyre in the dark, this relative standing alone while the grieving family watched, helpless, kept away.
A visual representation of being completely shut out.
Total control. A complete denial of their right to grieve. It was stark.
So inevitably, questions were asked. What justification did the authorities give for such an extraordinary act? A midnight cremation against the family's will.
Well, the official line from the local administration and police centered on law and order. That was their primary defense.
Law and order? How so?
They claimed they fueled large-scale unrest. Protests. That agitators, as they put it, might interfere or try to disrupt things if they waited. They argued any delay would worsen a volatile situation.
Okay, so fear of unrest. What else?
They also brought up a hygiene issue. They claimed the body had been in transit a long time, was decomposing, and posed a health hazard if not cremated quickly.
How was that received? Were people convinced?
Not really. There was immediate widespread skepticism from human rights lawyers, civil society groups, the media, and most importantly, the family itself.
Why the skepticism?
Critics pointed out there were alternatives, many alternatives that police simply didn't seem to consider or pursue. Well, independent legal experts noted they could have allowed the family to perform the rites under controlled conditions, maybe involved neutral third parties. They could have kept the media at a respectful distance without physically excluding the family, or even placed the body in safe custody temporarily, allowing for a daytime cremation later.
So options were available.
Absolutely. Which made the haste, the secrecy, the exclusion of the family seem, well, deeply suspicious. It raised troubling questions about the real motives.
It certainly looked less like a simple policing decision.
To many, it looked like the state asserting absolute control, prioritizing managing the narrative, perhaps, over basic human decency and due process. The optics were just terrible.
And this wasn't just about the cremation, was it? There was a pattern emerging, you said, right from the beginning.
Yes, if you connect the dots, the cremation feels less like an isolated mistake and more like part of a pattern of irregularities and, frankly, mismanagement that plagued the case from the start.
What kind of irregularities are we talking about?
One of the biggest criticisms was the delay, a significant delay in registering the first information report, the FIR. That's the document that officially starts a police investigation in India.
And delays in the initial investigation itself.
Exactly. The local police, especially the station house officer, the SHO, faced heavy criticism for not acting quickly, for not arresting suspects promptly.
And those first hours are critical, right?
Absolutely crucial. The first 48 to 72 hours are vital for securing the crime scene, preserving forensic evidence, getting fresh witness statements. Family and rights groups argued this window was essentially lost, potentially compromising the whole case.
And there were issues with medical statements, too.
Yes, that added to the confusion and distrust. Early media reports, perhaps selectively leaked, suggested no conclusive proof of rape. But then you had other medical opinions, and crucially, the victim's own dying declaration, citing injuries consistent with sexual assault. This disconnect fueled public debate and suspicion. Was there an attempt to downplay the sexual violence aspect?
That's a serious question. And what about the transfers of officials?
That also raised red flags. In the days following the incident, several key officers involved in the case were transferred.
Is that unusual?
Administrative reshuffles happened, but the timing here felt convenient to some. It led to widespread suspicion of political interference. Was it an effort to silence or redirect the inquiry? It certainly created that perception.
So delays, contradictions, transfers, it paints a picture.
It paints a picture of an official response that seemed geared towards managing a crisis, maybe protecting certain interests rather than ensuring a swift, impartial investigation.
And then there was the handling of the media. You mentioned the family being blocked from the pyre. But what about journalists trying to report on this?
Yes. The way authorities managed, or rather restricted, press access was another major point of contention. It wasn't subtle, it felt like an active strategy.
What did that look like on the ground?
Journalists reported facing deliberate roadblocks, multiple police checkpoints preventing entry to the village. Some received explicit instructions from district officials not to come. There were even accounts documented by independent reporters of journalists being verbally harassed, intimidated, physically manhandled, or just flat out prevented from speaking to the family.
So a near total information blackout enforced by the authorities.
It certainly felt like that in the crucial early stages. Early press coverage was heavily filtered through official channels, which naturally fueled accusations of state-level damage control, an attempt to shape the narrative before independent facts could emerge.
And you mentioned a deliberate policy to minimize the sexual assault allegation.
That was perhaps one of the most troubling aspects. For a significant period, official statements seemed to actively downplay or question the sexual nature of the attack, often citing a lack of conclusive forensic evidence, even with the dying declaration.
How did experts react to that?
It drew sharp criticism, described later as withered criticism, from legal experts and human rights groups. They saw it as an instinct to suppress the truth rather than investigate it properly.
So taking all this together, the delays, the media control, the downplaying, what conclusion did observers draw?
It didn't look like simple incompetence. For many, particularly those working on social justice, it looked like a pattern of protecting the powerful and marginalizing the vulnerable, a systemic bias that just shattered public trust and added immeasurably to the family's trauma.
Let's talk about that vulnerability. How central was the issue of caste in everything that unfolded?
It wasn't just incidental, it was absolutely central. You cannot understand the Hathras case without understanding the caste dimension.
Can you break that down for us?
The victim belonged to the Dalit community, historically oppressed, marginalized, at the bottom of the traditional caste hierarchy.
And the alleged attackers?
They were members of a dominant caste in that village, a group holding significant local power, social, economic, political.
So that context shaped everything.
It shaped the dynamics of the crime itself, the inherent vulnerability, and it profoundly shaped the official reaction, or lack thereof, that followed.
Is caste-based violence common in India?
Regrettably, yes. It's a persistent and deeply disturbing reality. But what made Hathras so alarming wasn't just the violence itself, but the sequence of official responses. They seemed to systematically align with those holding power.
How so? What was the argument from activists?
Villagers and rights activists argued forcefully. The initial police slowness, the deeply disrespectful midnight cremation, the early attempts to control the narrative, all of this fit a known, long-standing pattern. A pattern where crimes involving marginalized victims and powerful perpetrators often lead to institutional delay, deflection, or downplaying.
And this is documented.
Yes, extensively. Numerous human rights reports detail how marginalized communities face institutional bias at every stage. Reporting the crime, the investigation itself, the prosecution, even just accessing the justice system.
And the cremation became a symbol of this.
For many Dalit activists, yes. Their refusal to allow the family their traditional rights wasn't just an administrative blunder. It was seen as a raw assertion of caste supremacy, a chilling message that even in death, a Dalit family's dignity could be violated with impunity by the system.
So as this public anger was building, the authorities shifted tactics again, focusing on controlling the information flow itself.
Exactly. It became a battle over the narrative. They went to quite extraordinary lengths to try and silence the press and shape public perception.
We talked about the checkpoints and harassment earlier. Were there other methods?
Beyond the physical blocking, there were reports of pressure being applied, threats of legal action against journalists, attempts to discredit those who were reporting critically, and social media, which initially filled the void with eyewitness accounts and videos, also faced pressure. Reports surfaced of content being taken down, accounts scrutinized. It was a multi-pronged effort to contain the story.
Why? What were the likely motives behind this intense media blockade? Critics seem to land on two main reasons.
Right. The first was likely about preventing mobilization. Authorities probably feared that crowds gathering, activists arriving, opposition politicians visiting, that this could snowball into large-scale, sustained protests.
A threat to public order, in their view.
Perhaps. Or maybe a threat to their political standing, especially with national attention growing. Controlling access meant controlling the potential for organized dissent, even if that dissent was a legitimate expression of grief and outrage.
And the second motive?
That was likely about shaping the evidence narrative. With the dying declaration pointing squarely at gang rape and caste violence, officials might have preferred to frame it differently.
How?
Maybe frame it as just a tragic law and order incident, a local crime, perhaps a dispute gone wrong, anything but a case of caste atrocity or sexual violence that would attract national condemnation and intense scrutiny under specific laws like the Prevention of Atrocities Act.
What was the impact of this information control?
It was significant. While national TV often focused on the sheer spectacle of the cremation, those powerful, awful images, official statements, were simultaneously trying to question or recast the sexual violence narrative. This created confusion. It also effectively isolated the family, trapping them in their trauma while slowing down any independent effort to get to the full truth.
But the outcry didn't just disappear. Public pressure, political pressure.
Yeah.
It eventually forced some action, right?
Yes, absolutely. The sheer volume of public anger, combined with pressure from civil society and the political opposition, eventually compelled the judicial and administrative systems to step in. That was a key turning point.
What form did that take?
The High Court played a critical role. It took suo motu notice, meaning it initiated proceedings itself, recognizing the immense public interest and the gravity of the situation.
What did the High Court do?
It summoned the top district officials, the district magistrate, the superintendent of police, demanding explanations, especially for the midnight cremation. Crucially, the court explicitly called the cremation a violation of the constitutional right to dignity. It insisted officials answer for their actions and affirmed the family's right to perform rites according to their faith. That judicial pressure was immense.
And on the investigation side?
Under this intense scrutiny, the state government formed a special investigation team, SIT. This was a dedicated unit meant to investigate both the original crime and the controversial official conduct surrounding the cremation. Following that, several officers involved, including the SP and the local SHO, were either transferred or suspended pending the inquiry. A tacit admission, perhaps, that serious lapses had occurred.
So the investigation was formally handed over?
Yes, it was positioned for a more thorough forensic investigation. The explicit goals were to corroborate the dying declaration, secure any remaining physical evidence, and arrest the suspects.
But did this solve the underlying problems?
It addressed the immediate crisis, but it also highlighted deeper issues. The difficulty of collecting good forensic evidence in rural areas, sometimes due to lack of resources or training. The challenge of protecting witnesses who feel intimidated by local power structures. And the fundamental question of police impartiality in such highly charged, caste-sensitive cases. Rights groups argued strongly that only an external, fully independent investigation could truly restore trust.
So, with the SIT taking over, arrests followed.
Yes, under that increased pressure, the 4 suspects named in the dying declaration were arrested by the state police.
And the charges filed reflected the severity.
They did. The charges were comprehensive. Gang rape, attempted murder, culpable homicide not amounting to murder, related to the injuries leading to death, and very significantly, offenses under the Scheduled Castes and Scheduled Tribes Prevention of Atrocities Act.
That last one specifically addresses the caste angle.
Exactly. It acknowledged the crime wasn't just violence, but violence potentially motivated by caste discrimination, targeting a member of a protected community.
What evidence did the prosecution rely on?
The dying declaration was absolutely central. Prosecutors emphasized its legal weight, its direct testimony from the victim. Medical reports were re-examined by forensic experts. Witness statements from villagers and supporting testimony from the medical professionals in Delhi who treated her were all compiled.
But prosecuting cases like this is never simple, is it? Especially with the initial problems.
No, it's incredibly challenging. Proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt is always a high bar. Ensuring the chain of custody for evidence was unbroken, given the initial delays, was a potential hurdle. And critically, protecting witnesses from intimidation is paramount in places where local power dynamics are strong. untangling local feuds, reconciling conflicting accounts, and doing all this under intense political scrutiny. It's a monumental task for any prosecution team.
You mentioned political pressure. How did the politics of this play out? It happened in a very charged environment.
Extremely charged. And the Hathras case became fuel for that fire,
Yeah.
leading to intense polarization.
How did the different sides react?
Opposition parties, rights groups, activists, they immediately framed it as proof of systemic oppression, institutional failure, particularly regarding Dalits and women's safety. They demanded central government intervention. The ruling party and the state government, on the other hand, highlighted the actions they had taken, the SIT, the suspensions, and promised justice, trying to project an image of control and responsiveness. Local leaders often towed the official line, while national leaders tried to balance expressing concern with calls for calm and due process, warning against politicization.
And this played out publicly.
Oh, very dramatically. We saw politicians from opposition parties trying to visit the family, only to be detained or blocked by police. These confrontations became flashpoints themselves, generating more media coverage and outrage.
So the case became symbolic.
Deeply symbolic. For some, it was a clear-cut case of caste atrocity compounded by an official cover-up. It tapped into generations of historical injustice. For others, particularly those defending the government, it was framed as media hype, political opportunism, something requiring calm adherence to legal procedure, suggesting initial reports might be exaggerated.
And the victim's family, their rights, sometimes get lost in all this.
Tragically, yes. In such polarized situations, the focus can shift from the victim's needs and the pursuit of truth to political point scoring. Rights groups kept calling for depoliticization for a fair inquiry, while others argued that political pressure was actually needed to force the system to act against its usual inertia.
Amidst all the legal and political wrangling, let's not forget the human cost. What was the reality for the family?
It's crucial we keep returning to that. Beyond the headlines, there's a family shattered by grief, then subjected to profound humiliation and a feeling of complete powerlessness.
Can you describe the trauma they experienced?
Accounts from relatives are just heartbreaking. Being physically kept from their daughter's pyre, watching her rites performed hastily by someone else, feeling their culture, their dignity just trampled on. It wasn't just the grief of loss. It was this added layer of systemic disrespect, which is incredibly traumatizing.
And the impact didn't end there, did it?
Yeah.
What were the long-term consequences for them?
No, it cast a very long shadow. Reports describe social ostracism, being shunned in their village and local markets. Their children reportedly faced taunts. That crucial community support structure, vital in rural areas, seemed to crumble.
Economically, too.
Yes, losing their daughter, who contributed to the household income, plunged them deeper into hardship. Facing fear of reprisals was also a constant anxiety. Villagers were hesitant to speak out, afraid of backlash from powerful locals or even administrative retaliation.
It sent a chilling message.
A very chilling message. Grieve too loudly, demand justice too forcefully, and you might face consequences. While support groups bravely provided aid, legal help, counseling those vital interventions couldn't instantly undo the deep societal marginalization that enabled both the crime and the deeply flawed response. Their ordeal is a stark reminder of the lasting impact.
So looking back at this whole tragic sequence, what are the concrete legal and policy lessons we need to take away?
Hathras exposed some really critical structural flaws. It wasn't just about individual errors. Several key lessons stand out. First, police training and sensitivity. There's a clear need for much better mandatory protocols on handling sexual violence cases and cases with caste dimensions. It has to go beyond procedure. It needs to instill respect for dignity, especially for grieving families from marginalized groups.
What else?
Second, evidence preservation. This was a major failure point. Immediate, impartial forensic collection with a transparent chain of custody is non-negotiable. The initial delays here were incredibly damaging.
And the media access issue.
Third, yes, media access and protection. There needs to be a balance. Maintaining order is one thing, but wholesale restrictions on media and civil society undermine transparency and trust. Clearer, fairer protocols are needed.
Protection for victims and witnesses seems crucial, too.
Fourth, absolutely, witness and victim protection, especially in rural areas where intimidation is rife. We need robust mechanisms, legal aid, counseling, maybe even relocation options so people can testify without fear.
And addressing the caste bias within the system itself.
Fifth, caste sensitivity and administration. It can't just be ad hoc responses. There must be real accountability for officials who mishandle or downplay these cases. Systemic bias needs systemic solutions.
Finally.
And finally, public communication. Officials need to be careful, accurate, and accountable in what they say, especially early on. Misleading statements just inflame tensions and erode trust further.
Did the system show any capacity to respond?
The High Court's intervention showed the legal system can step in. But turning those directives into lasting systemic change on the ground, that requires sustained political will and a real shift in administrative culture. That's the much harder part.
Which brings us to the question, was Hathras unique or part of a wider pattern?
Tragically, while the specifics are horrific, the patterns are depressingly familiar across India. Delayed investigations for marginalized victims. Check. Local power structures influencing the response. Check. Inconsistent media civil society attention. Check. Political pressure shaping investigations. Check.
So learning from other similar cases is important.
Crucial. True structural reform needs things like independent police oversight, better forensic capabilities in rural areas, and long-term support for victims' families, psychological and economic. These are essential to break the cycle.
And where does the Hathras case stand now, legally?
The wheels of justice grind slowly, especially in complex, contested cases like this. Arrests were made, charges framed. But prosecutions face challenges, potential evidence gaps from the initial phase, witness vulnerability, the sheer passage of time.
So the final verdict is still pending.
Yes. And beyond the specific outcome for the accused, the case's real legacy hinges on whether those deeper reforms actually happen. Will the shock of the midnight cremation lead to lasting change in how police and administration treat the most vulnerable? Or will it fade into memory as just another terrible incident?
Those larger questions remain unanswered.
Unfortunately, yes. But what's undeniable is the deep mark Hathras left on India's conscience. It can't be and shouldn't be easily forgotten.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the final takeaway? What did that funeral at 2:30 a.m. ultimately signify?
I think it became more than just a procedural violation. It became this chilling metaphor, didn't it? A metaphor for the state's capacity to deny basic dignity, and maybe even society's capacity to look away when it happens. Hathras forced a confrontation with that uncomfortable intersection of caste, gender, and power. How institutions meant to protect can sometimes participate in erasure, in compounding trauma.
And true justice is more than just a conviction.
Absolutely. It's about restoring dignity. It's about truth-telling. And it's about the hard work of systemic reform to prevent it from happening again. For the family, justice means accountability for the perpetrators, yes, but also repair of the institutional failures that added so much insult to injury.
It's a call to action then.
Definitely. For the media, to keep asking questions, to follow up, for the courts to ensure transparency and uphold the law, for the police to internalize procedures that protect dignity alongside evidence, and for all of us in society to remember that dignity in life demands dignity in death.
A baseline for a functioning democracy.
Exactly. When institutions routinely violate the vulnerable, something is fundamentally broken. The midnight cremation wasn't a slip-up. It exposed a cruelty that needs confronting. The task ahead is long, uncomfortable, but vital. Translate that outrage into reform, ensure that families' rights weren't violated in vain.
And that brings our deep dive on the Hathras case to a close. Going into the granular details really does reveal those layers of systemic problems, raising such profound questions about justice and dignity. We hope this has given you a lot to think about the impact of institutional power, societal structures, especially on the most marginalized among us. Thank you for joining us for this important deep dive. We look forward to exploring more complex issues with you next time.